Earlier in the program, I spoke to Red Bridge Group Director Simon Welsh about some similarities in the way Australian and American voters are responding to major parties and the politics, all politicians. Unhappy with the cost of living, housing crisis, the state of healthcare, people are seeking alternative, disruptive solutions. Now, Simon says we're probably a long way off getting a figure like Donald Trump in power, but it seems there is an appetite here, even in Australia, for someone who might disrupt the status quo.
Most Australians sort of sit in this very pragmatic approach, which is, yep, okay, we want you to turn the sort of status quo upside down. That'd be great, but you've got to have pragmatic policies for how you're going to do that aren't going to sort of speak to an anxiety in people that, you know, when they hear that sort of, you know, populist sort of disruption and just upsetting the status quo for the sake of upsetting the status quo, what they hear is people getting hurt. What they fear is, you know, is the uncertainty and the anxiety that comes with that.
Joining me now is James Campbell from the Herald Sun. James, great to see you. It was interesting, Simon Welsh at the end of that interview also spoke about, you know, these baked-in views of Albanese and this government. It's really hard to change voters' minds. So they'll be asking themselves, what is the point of the Albanese government and why do they deserve a second term? How's that going to go down in Victoria?
Well, I think what's clouding things in Victoria, particularly at the moment, is the very, very, very unpopular state government. You know, obviously our economy is not travelling as well as some parts of Australia. We have a huge amount of government debt. There's a general anxiety in the community down here about the direction of the state, and there's a real potential for the federal government to be punished for the sins of the state government. More broadly, I agree with Simon. I think Albanese's problem at the moment is that he's running out of runway. We're almost at the end of the year politically. There's going to be a couple of months where people are tuned out. Then we're coming back. He's got to try and focus people's minds on why he should be re-elected. And I think there's a sense that those of us who have been waiting for the kind of pivot to come from this government, when are they really going to wake up to themselves and get their political skates on? And it's starting to dawn on us that there might be no pivot coming. It's certainly starting to dawn on some of the backbenchers that there's no pivot coming, and I don't think they're all that thrilled about it.
What do you think the election of Donald Trump has done to Australian politics? I do feel like publicly, there's a lot of caution on the coalition side, but privately, they're really energised by it.
Well, I think they are. I mean, obviously, you know, when a right of centre government takes power in the English-speaking world, their counterparts always look to what lessons might be drawn from it. Now, broadly speaking, there were three elements to Trump's victory, if you believe the pundits. The first was immigration, which is the most important. The second was an attack on the so-called woke agenda, which some polls have shown was the most important factor in luring swinging votes. And the third one was inflation, the economy, and Trump's promise to really bring industry back to the United States, something that he's talked about for 8 years now. Now, the coalition here can clearly seize on immigration. They're doing their best to do that. The woke agenda, such as this, is probably not as advanced in this country, but if they want to talk about cultural issues, they would be wise, I think, to talk about the fact that the government spent a year on something like The Voice, which was not really, you know, it's a mainstream concern for most Australia. You know, he's not, you know, they for them versus, you know, you for you. The Prime Minister spent a year talking about a very esoteric thing to most Australians. But the issue of the economy is, on the one hand, yes, we've suffered inflation, and yes, we've suffered a huge drops in our standard of living, the biggest in the OECD. But can you really see the coalition promising to bring tariffs back to create to expand the Made in Australia agenda? It's really difficult to see that, isn't it? So they've got two legs of the Trump stool, but they really don't have the third. And it's not clear to me, unless they're going to turn themselves into the DLP, how they can get ahead of that stuff on the economic side of things. What do you think?
Look, I think it's really difficult as well, and complaints are easier than solutions at the moment. But if you look at it on a pure numbers basis, the coalition needs net 21 seats. I think that is a very difficult number to get to, but I think they could probably get there in minority with the Teals. Now, are the Teals in Victoria going to support a Peter Dutton minority government? I don't think so. But if you look at the Sydney Teals and if you look at the voter makeup and the history there, and if it's an election on the economy, well, the Teals essentially should be, you know, having a serious look at supporting a coalition government if it did come down to minority. And there's been this tradition in this country, James, where when we get to close to a minority and independents are asked before an election what they would do in the event of a minority government, they always get away with saying, we'll see what the electorate says, etc., etc. I think that should change, especially before this election. They should be asked to put their views forward and what their leaning might be, because I think people deserve to know what their leaning might be in the event of a minority government before an election.
But we know that, I mean, I know they say they've got an open mind to these things, but I think
rubbish.
Virtually all of the Teals will end up supporting the ALP. That's their, because if the people in their seats want a coalition government, they can vote for the coalition. You know, the whole business model of the Teals is to, you know, create a non-threatening, non-coalition model for the voters to opt for. I don't see them supporting Peter Dutton to stay, and particularly
Peter Dutton. If it's on climate change, yeah, they should support the ALP, but the election's not a rerun of the last election. This election is more about cost of living, and climate change in a cost of living crisis takes a back seat. It's now well down the list of priorities. So, I mean, I just don't buy that argument. When you look at the makeup of seats like Wentworth and along Sydney's northern beaches, I mean, they are traditional coalition seats. And if you're talking about small businesses, I mean, they should consider it. We shouldn't accept that they would normally support the ALP.
Maybe they should, but I think you'll find that they'll come up with a reason why they can't. But this might become academic anyway, because let's look at the trend. The trend, you know, every poll over, you know, if you look at them over the months, everything is going Dutton's way. You look at it, the support for the government, it kind of pauses for a bit, but it always pauses in a declining direction. The only time they've managed to reverse their fortunes since The Voice for any period of time was when they brought in the alterations to stage 3 tax cuts.
Sure.
But after a period of time, it just their support continued its relentless dial down, you know, movement down. Now, who knows where support for the government's going to be in 6 months? If the trend keeps going the way it's going, you know, we might end up not talking about a minority government at all. We might be looking at a majority coalition government.
Pretty hard to do that without the Teal seats. Yeah, you've got to win some. If you don't get the Teals back, you've got to win those like safe, you know, 5-6% Labor seats. They might get the Teals back. Maybe.
I mean, if you're talking about cost of living, people in these seats with these huge mortgages are not immune to cost of living issues.
That's right.
They may have regarded the Teals as an indulgence that they could afford in more prosperous times, and now they need to come back to the coalition. Who knows? I mean, I think I agree with you. At the moment, the most likely outcome after the next election is a minority Labor government. But at the moment, I would say, as we go down the straight, the majority coalition government is closing fast. I think the least likely scenario at the moment is a majority Labor government. It's simply, it's difficult to see how that can occur, particularly, as I say, because the government is travelling so badly in Victoria.
James, great to talk to you. Let's do this again soon.
Good to talk to you, Laura.